Welcome to The Application, the podcast series from Side Business School, featuring some of the extraordinary personalities who were offered a place on the Executive MBA here at Oxford University. I'm Kathy Harvey. As Associate Dean, I've been involved with the people who've embarked on this journey for over half the 20 years since the programme was established. This is my chance to reconnect with them and to hear more about their struggles and their achievements, personal and professional, and to learn the leadership lessons we can all take from these inspiring alumni.
I was so scared to make a mistake and so much of a perfectionist to a point that one of my bosses said to me, "Have you ever failed in your life? Because I think you need to fail one big stuff up for you to realize that it's not the end."
Well, I'm delighted to be joined today for our podcast by Thabiso Foto. Thabiso is the Chief Financial Officer for Founders Factory Africa, which is an investor in early-stage tech startups in many different countries in Africa. And I think I'm right in saying Thabiso also has an interest in Southeast Asia and the UK as well, so quite a complicated landscape of investing. It sounds a great job. I'm sure it has many stresses and strains. But you have only just recently finished your Executive MBA. Were your parents and family with you at the end of course ceremony to see you there as you came to the end of your course?
Firstly, thank you for the invite. To answer your question, my parents were not here to celebrate my end of course ceremony. I know they were with me in spirit though. My brother, one of my 4 brothers, were here to celebrate with me at the end of course ceremony. And I had cousins and friends also celebrating with me, which was amazing.
You come from, as you say, a large family, and your family background is very different to the kind of role and life that you live now. Can you take us back a little bit to your childhood, where you grew up in Zimbabwe, what your childhood was like and what your family was like?
So I was born in a very small town called Kwekwe in the Midlands of Zimbabwe. And I am 6th out of 7 children. Both my parents are still alive, luckily, and all my siblings still alive, and I'm grateful for that. I think just surrounding area is what we called townships. And I think here is probably what you would, it would be an equivalent of your council estates or sink estates. I think that's what you call them here. But in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, we call them townships. But pretty much this is usually areas that are highly densely populated, really an area where you experience a lot of challenges, I think, from public service, not enough access to education, or the education that you have is not necessarily, the schools are not well resourced when I compare to where my kids are going to school now, obviously. So yeah, I wouldn't say it was the best environment in terms of raising a child. So it must have been a really difficult job for my parents, when I look back, to raise us out of there. But I think the values that they instilled in us is really what was the anchor and the foundation for all my siblings. One being education is your one way out of poverty, really. So they had very strong belief in educating us and making sure we got the best education possible that they could possibly afford us. Secondly, the value of discipline. I think just being able to start something and finish it. And I laugh back at how just my mom used to wake us up at 6 a.m. and say, just get up and do something. And I'm like, but what am I getting up to do, right? But now looking back again, I think being able to get up and just optimally using your time is just some of those few lessons I can maybe speak to. And there's obviously many lessons that I've learned just growing up. That's kind of the background in my upbringing, really a family of hard work and education and perseverance and really just pushing through against the odds. And my mom just never took below average. She was a stay-at-home mom. She never worked. My dad worked. He was a factory worker in a fertilizer manufacturing company in that small town where we grew up. But yeah, I think both of them just kind of were aligned in terms of that value of hard work and just discipline. And I think that's pretty much my upbringing and my anchor to kind of where I am now.
I'm just wondering if you say to your own children at 6 o'clock every morning, get up and just do something.
I'm not getting any luck with that, but I try. Sometimes I give them a lazy day, but I try to make sure that they are up, you wash your face, you spread your bed, and get up and sit. And even if it's doing or taking a walk, let's do that. I don't know. I just believe sitting until 12 or sleeping until 12 sometimes can breed laziness. And we don't have that much time in a day. So we need to maximize it as much as we can.
How old are your children?
My daughter is turning 11 and my son is turning 8 this Friday.
Oh, sometime before the teenage years really kick in, when perhaps you might not have as much success getting them out of bed before 12, but perhaps I'll come back in a few years' time and ask you to be so.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Zimbabwe, and of course the economy and the political situation in Zimbabwe was not easy. And for a family with 7 children, as you say, in a township, making ends meet and having ambitions, realising ambitions for your family must have been extremely difficult. What did you observe from your other siblings who were older than you, which gave you the incentive to go on and really take education seriously and then go on to university?
Like I said, I think the starting point was obviously just the values my parents set for us. But I do believe, being the 6th, I'm right at the bottom of the chain. I've observed my siblings go to school. I've observed them study. I've observed them also fail, but trying again. They were chasing their own careers, but they also saw a possibility to also plant seeds in their younger siblings, but also just to set a good example and a standard that was high for us to follow. And my one brother went to McKinsey straight from university, and I think he was there for 3 years and then decided he wanted to study his own business. And again, like if you look at my background and where we came from, my parents would have thought, are you mad? You're living a globally reputable organization that probably so many people want to get to start your own business. Who's going to fund you? It's not like we have a family fund that's going to seed into your business. But he went on with it. And out of that came a really successful mining business that was doing a lot of mining globally, and at some point is listed in the London Stock Exchange. So that's just one. My other brother was a medical doctor. He went through the medical doctor journey and decided he wanted to get into business. He was hurt badly. I think he went into business with the wrong people and really went down with his face flat on the floor, but he got back up. He's now the managing partner at McKinsey South Africa. So I think I've seen failure, but I've seen them really getting themselves up, bouncing back, and just pushing through and making sure that they still chase whatever that ambition is for themselves and for their lives.
So you got your A-levels, you went to university, and you decided to study accounting. Now, our accounting professors will not like me much for saying not many people get excited about studying accounting.
That's correct.
But you and many of your friends I know went on and chose that kind of undergraduate degree. Why did you do it?
For me personally, I would say my sister chose accounting for me because her dream for me was to become a chartered accountant for very valid reasons. One, you could get into an audit firm that would pay for your university tuition while you're working. And also there was an opportunity right at the end, once you qualify as a chartered accountant, to go for secondment anywhere in the world you wanted to go. So it was a great opportunity for me to do. And that's kind of how I ended up in this route of accounting. So I think that's education system plays a factor in how people ended up in those different careers. For me personally, it was my sister who said, this is what you're going to do. And that's what I did.
You sound very dutiful. Did you have any thoughts of rebellion against this?
I did. Left to my own devices, I would have become a struggling athlete.
What kind of sport?
I used to sprint. I used to play basketball. And I would say even to this day, some of my happiest moments were on the track. And I still look for tracks wherever I go. Even now, I've just moved to Guildford and I found the track and on the basketball court. So I really enjoyed sports and I still do. However, I think sports is something that's nurtured in certain countries, more in certain countries than others. And certainly in Zimbabwe, there's no way I would have become a very successful basketball player or very successful, because there's kids who are playing basketball from the time they're 4 years old in the US. So competing against that would have been really difficult. So yeah, I did have moments of rebelling and wanting to do sport. And obviously that wasn't going to fly. The other thing I tried was doing banking. My first job out of high school, I was a bank teller. And I said to my sister, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to find a career in banking. And I probably would have worked out. But again, I think it was more about my sister having experienced, I think, life in general, which was really hard, considering where we grew up, and also finding the best, I think, or career that had the highest chances for me to succeed and be able to look after myself and be financially independent.
You did go into consulting, I think, in Deloitte, and you were chief of staff for a while to the CEO of Absa Bank in South Africa. What did you enjoy most, but also what were the struggles during those years when you were trying to make your way in your earlier career?
At Deloitte, I was doing audit, and Deloitte was paying for my undergraduate degree. And we had two chances. If you fail the second time, you're out. And just balancing studies and the pressure of work and having to work long hours, I think was the biggest challenge for me at the time. But again, at that time, you're surrounded by people who are going through the same challenge as you, and you stop finding excuses and you actually find ways to make it work. And then I would say post Deloitte, I've actually finished off my articles at Grant Thornton, and I'd moved to Cape Town at the time. And moving to Cape Town, I worked for partly Grant Thornton, and then I worked for a company called Mineral Services Group, which was very entrepreneurial. I absolutely loved my time there. Actually founded by a British family from Liverpool, but they had a passion for diamonds, and they set up a lot of different companies that were really looking to serve the mining industry, particularly diamond exploration. And I think my challenge there was, one, being appointed to a CFO at a very young age, and I had no clue what to do, and possibly just questioning things a lot and finding better ways to do things. Something that got me into trouble when I was in high school, I think was one of the key qualities that actually really helped me, I think, navigate that space. But post that, when you look at how I then navigated to being a chief of staff and those other roles that I took on, I think that was my way of also looking at how do I train myself and upskill myself to get to really fully understand how to run a business without me running it. The second thing I would highlight is South Africa is probably the first time I experienced racial inequality. And that was hard in some companies. Other companies, I didn't really have that challenge, but definitely in other companies, you could actually feel how much harder you have to work to not only stand out, to deliver, but also to almost guard your reputation and yourself against either just being accused of bad performance when there isn't really bad performance because somebody just doesn't give you benefit of doubt. So I'd say that's probably one of the challenges I experienced a bit later in my career.
That's interesting because, of course, this would have been a post-apartheid situation in South Africa, but you still felt that inequality. Did you also feel any inequality or any discrimination because you were a female executive?
I wouldn't say discrimination because I was a female executive, but I'd say there were definitely certain behaviors that I observed that I would think to myself, if I were a man, you probably would not have said that to me. Or if I were a man, you would not have spoken in the way that you've spoken. But I think there are definitely other people that actually just really need sitting down with and saying, absolutely no, you don't do that. This is unacceptable, whether they take it or not. It's up to them. But it's my observation that sometimes there are good intentions, just blind spots. And in other cases, there's just purely people who don't want to learn.
Perhaps the voice of your strong sister in your ear made a difference to you. So you mentioned the qualities that got you into trouble in school. Perhaps you'd like to say a little bit more about those.
One of them I would say is I struggled with authority a lot. I struggled with rules that didn't make sense to me. And either I would question them and get into trouble, or I would just not do it. And I'll give you maybe one example. I used to run, so I used to sprint. So between supper and study time, I would go to the field and I would sprint. And 6 o'clock was the time they would lock the gate, the girls' hostel, because I went to a boarding school. One day, the boarding mistress at the time decides to lock the gate at 5:45 because she wanted to get to church by 6 o'clock. It was a Catholic school. And I see her locking the gate at 5:45 and I don't run. Everybody else runs. So instead of walking towards the gate, I walked towards her. And I asked her to please open the gate for me because it wasn't 6 o'clock yet. So while I was technically correct, I did not do the right thing. And I think that was one of the things that was a factor in them deciding whether they'll take me for A-level or not. Because ever since then, my relationship with her was just bad. But I think questioning things, so at some point I think I started like suppressing that because of that experience. But then you get to work, and then one of my bosses, actually, when I worked in an asset management firm, said to me, I brought you here because I've heard you actually have a questioning spirit. You don't accept things as they are, but you've been quiet. Why? And I had to go back and say, okay, there's certain things that were natural to me that I've had to suppress. Now I have to unlearn that and get them back again and bring them back to my work because it's actually valued. So I'd say that's probably a perfect example of what got me into trouble back then, but actually is very much something that was valued in my career and has probably really opened up a lot of doors for me ever since.
Well, we like people who ask questions at Oxford, of course. So then you joined Founders Factory and you are in charge of investing a lot of money, I think $115 million, across Africa and also with some interest in the UK and Southeast Asia. What's it like working with entrepreneurs? And give me a sense of how you see the startup landscape in the countries you work in, particularly in the African countries.
So working with entrepreneurs is very hard work. Founders Factory Africa invests in early stage entrepreneurs, from somebody with a concept, an idea, and hasn't actually built out the business itself, to businesses that are at what we call pre-Series A stage of a startup. But typically, in simple terms, that's really, we are the first investors in entrepreneurs who just have an idea or have just built out a product. They don't even have customers, they haven't made profits, and try to help them go from that idea to actually building out a backable venture or an investable opportunity, like others would call it. So working at that stage of business is really hard because, one, you're working with young entrepreneurs sometimes, or they could be relatively mature, but they've never run a business before. Secondly, there's just challenges that any entrepreneur faces, and I'm learning this now as I interact more with even entrepreneurs. But particularly in Africa, I would say the biggest challenge is access to finance, access to funding for entrepreneurs, especially at these early stages. It's very, very limited. If I were to go and ask for a bank loan right now and I started my business, with all the credentials I have, I would probably not get the funding because I don't have a track record of having ever built a business. If I get debt, it would be very, very expensive. And there's reasons for that. So Founders Factory is really trying to close that gap to, one, give access to capital for entrepreneurs that are starting out. Two, also just give them the support, operational support they need at these early stages of their business. Because again, if you're starting out your business, you just got some capital, you actually really trying to stretch that capital as far as you can. So you don't have the budget to be employing top talent because that costs a lot of money. So the way we've set ourselves up is to actually have a pool of experts across product, growth, technology, investment readiness, to then support those entrepreneurs to actually build out their product. And then the third thing is access to market. So we've partnered with large corporates. Partnering with those corporates not only gives us the capital to then invest in the startups, but it also gives us access to markets that they have access to, and being able to build those startup corporate collaborations to then give the entrepreneurs and the startups speed to market, so that they can actually build out and start growing their revenue quickly enough to then be able to access the next level of investment. So that's pretty much, in a nutshell, I think what Founders Factory is doing and the gap we're trying to close.
Okay, so you were in the middle of this exciting career when you decided to apply for the Oxford Executive MBA. You're used to hard work, but this seems, under the circumstances, quite a stretch. Why?
I think if my boss was listening, and I hope he will be listening at some point, he would have said, Kathy, I'm glad you asked that question. Because he said to me so many times, you are a mom, you've got 2 small kids, you have this job that is highly demanding, and you still choose to do your MBA. The decision to do my MBA was actually before Founders Factory. I had decided long before that I wanted to do an MBA. I shared earlier that I got my first CFO role when I was 28. And since then, I think I've observed a lot of different leaders, how they work, and I've been learning on the job. But I think a lot of my learning has been more influenced by how they lead. And I still had this curiosity for myself to say, is this the best way to lead? Is there a better way to lead? So that curiosity was always there. But also, I think having learned how sometimes just having principles, like a set of books that you go back to when you're not sure about what to do, is quite important. So for me, I think doing the MBA was really my way of saying, let me go learn from the best of the best. Let me learn from proven methods and approaches and frameworks that have worked in terms of navigating business complexities globally, but also navigating people complexities, because I think that's the biggest part of leadership that a lot of us struggle with. Working with people, you asked me the question earlier about challenges I've faced. I think that's something I actually omitted in that part of this conversation, that working with people is probably one of the biggest challenges. I actually had to pause my MBA at some point because I started then working for Founders Factory, and quickly I then moved into the CFO COO role, and that became too much at some point, and it was during COVID. And having paid a lot of money for my MBA, I said to myself, I think I'm going to have to park it for a bit, focus on building the business and working on building the team. And at the time, I think Founders Factory had 20 people. Now we're sitting at 60. So in that year, I had to build out the finance team, the legal team, the people team, operations team. So I did defer for a year, and I'm glad and grateful that at least that was allowed, because I think had that not been for that flexibility, maybe I would have just dropped out and not finished.
I do remember you talking through whether you should or shouldn't suspend for a bit, and being quite logical and thoughtful about the whole thing. And then I have memories of you sitting in the club room, getting your work done. And it's a big learning experience about yourself, taking time out to study when you're already professional. What have you really learned about yourself?
I've learned so much. So I learned, I think, hard work, education, all of those things right from when I was, I think I'd say, my first decade of my life. The second decade of my life, which was high school, I think I learned a lot about authority. We spoke about authority and respecting governance and processes that are put in place and relationships at that, because I think that incident I spoke about, walking to the boarding mistress instead of actually running like everybody else, that was just 15 minutes. I could have just done what everybody else did. But I was so hung up on the fact that it's not yet time. And I think sometimes we get hung up on the technical aspect and not the relationship building. And then I'd say the third decade, which is my first years in my working experience, I would say I learned a lot about really just understanding people. One of the key things I think that I became aware of was that I wasn't an active listener. I thought I listened very well until I had one of my team members. We were about to go live with the software development tool we were doing, and she just would not budge. And it took my CEO at the time to come in and sit and have an 8-hour meeting that was supposed to be 1 hour to learn that actually sometimes it's not about the deadline. It's not about the outcome we're trying to achieve, but are you taking people along the way with you? So I've learned a lot. And I think lastly, in maybe this decade that I've just entered, I'm exposing my age here, I've learned a lot about really intuition and having so much belief in myself and giving myself a chance. I think applying to Oxford, I had so many doubts in my head that I wouldn't make it. And you look at the statistics, right? And you're like, out of all the brilliant Africans, they would pick me. Why? And in my head, I had my brother's voice. Something he said to me maybe in my early 20s that if there's 1% chance of a positive outcome in anything, just take it. And I put in my application with that in mind and that 1% chance. And I got in. So I think that experience also just taught me a lot about giving yourself, just bet on yourself a bit, give yourself a bit more benefit of doubt, and then back it with obviously the hard work, the dedication, and the perseverance that's required to actually follow through.
That was obviously great advice from your brother, but we are all afraid of failure. So I wonder how seeing your brothers fail and then pick themselves up and succeed again shaped your own attitude to failure.
You have to know failure to then understand success. I do think that everybody has to fail at some point, because when we don't, we expect that things will always work and they actually don't. But also failure, when you fail and you work yourself back up or you bounce back, I think you also realize that you actually can take a risk, and what's the worst that can happen, right? You can get back up. Working with entrepreneurs, I think the company that I'm working for now is probably the first place where I think failure is celebrated, because even when we look for entrepreneurs, we're looking at second-time founders. They probably failed once or twice. But if somebody has failed, they know exactly what to avoid. They know the pitfalls, and they don't know everything, but definitely they would have learned from that failure what to do, what not to do, who to engage with and who to not engage with. So there's a lot of lessons, I think, from failure. And for me personally, I was so scared to make a mistake, even in just my corporate world, and so much of a perfectionist to a point that at some point, again, one of my bosses said to me, have you ever failed in your life? Because I think you need to fail one big stuff up for you to realize that it's not the end, but take risks, but take calculated risks. And yes, it might work or it might not work, but you get back up and you keep moving. So I've learned a lot from them, and I've seen that you probably are a better person after some of those setbacks in life than if you'd never had them.
So if you were writing an application for the next stage of your life, what would you say?
I would say that the next 10 years. So I recently turned 40. So I realize I have very limited time in terms of working. But maybe not, actually. My boss also said to me, this is probably the best time to actually do more and better than what I've done before. But with what I know now, one, just the skills and the knowledge that I've acquired. Two, the resources that I have. Three, the network that I have, and Oxford being a big part of that. I would say that we have a big role to play, I think, as business leaders, and I'm starting to understand my role a bit more, not only for my own personal career and what I'm building for myself and for my kids, but also just my role in society. We need more founders' factories to actually invest in early-stage entrepreneurs. I think the statistics say that over 60% of jobs created or jobs are really coming from small to medium-sized enterprises, yet they're the ones that struggle to get funding. So how do I play that role in business, in whether within venture capital, or if I end up in private equity, or if I end up back in traditional asset management, or in any other corporate for that matter, what is my role and what am I doing to actually build that better society? And I think when we are able to build that, we're able to build sustainable businesses. So that's what I would say maybe is what my focus is going to be for the next 10 years. And it's out to the universe.
Thabiso, this has been a great conversation. I feel I've learnt so much. You have, of course, succeeded. You are an Oxonian.
Thank you.
I wish you the very best for the next stage of your life. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathy. I've absolutely enjoyed chatting to you as well.
So this is the very, very last question, I promise. I'm wondering what your sister thinks now and whether she's satisfied.
I think she is. I would definitely say that she's a proud sister. She's very happy with her investment in me. So I'm also very thankful to her, and I'm really happy that she has acknowledged that I've done her proud. Thank you.
You've been listening to The Application from Oxford University's Side Business School. You can catch up with all our episodes wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to know more about Side Business School, take a look at the Oxford Answers section on our website, or check out the programme pages for more inspiring stories about our Executive MBA alumni. The Application is produced by Philippa Goodrich and Oxford Digital Media. I'm Kathy Harvey, Associate Dean at Side Business School. Thank you for listening.